Alright, this video is going to talk about solving one-step equations. And whenever we're solving an equation, our goal is always to get the variable by itself. So, just a couple of quick things to remember. First of all, a variable is just a letter that represents a number. So, we could have a variable like x, or y, or z. Really, it can be any letter. Remember, it's just a variable is a letter that represents a number. Alright, so the first thing that we should do whenever we're solving an equation is, first of all, draw a line down your equal sign. The reason why that we're doing that is that we want to remember that these two sides need to equal one another. That's why there's an equal sign here. That means they need to be the same. They need to be balanced. And drawing this line here is going to remind us that whatever we do to one side, we need to do to the other so that they stay balanced. So something that I like to do to help myself solve equations, I like to make a do and undo box. So what I want you to do is go ahead and create a little cheat chart. And on one side we're going to have do, and on the other side we're going to have undo. And we're going to ask ourselves the question, what is happening to our variable? What's happening to this x? Well, 14 is being added to x. So what's being done? It's plus 14. Now, to undo something, to do it to the other side, we need to use something called inverse operations. The inverse operations. To undo addition and subtraction, we're going to use addition or subtraction. To undo addition, we use subtraction. To undo subtraction, we use addition. Same goes with multiplication and division. To undo multiplication, we use division. To undo division, we use multiplication. So how do we undo plus 14? We're going to minus 14. So now I'm going to go ahead and show my work, and your work should look exactly like this. How do I undo plus 14? I minus 14. Remember, anything you do to one side, you must also do to the other. So I'm going to go to the other side of my equal sign and write minus 14. Now our goal here is to get x alone, and I'm going to show you on this first one why we can cancel this. We have not done anything to our x, so I'm going to bring it down. Positive 14 minus 14. So a positive 14, we look at the sign in front, minus 14, that gives me 0. I'm just going to write plus 0. Equals 22 minus 14, that gives me a positive 8. Now x plus 0, that's just x, because x plus 0, 0 plus anything is just that number. So I don't need this 0. That's why normally when we do a positive 14 minus 14, we just cross this out, because we don't need this 0. We are left with x equals 8. Now something that you should always do is check your work. So I'm going to write check right here, and on your notes you should also be checking. The first thing we do is we rewrite the problem we were given originally. X plus 14 equals 22. Since we got that x equals 8, we can substitute 8 in for x. So where I see this x, I'm going to put 8, and then I'm going to bring down plus 14 equals 22. Now if we did our work correctly, 8 plus 14 should equal 22. Let's try that. 8 plus 14, that is 22. 22 equals 22. Our check works. So our answer is x equals 8. Let's go ahead and do another example. Let's take an example like 0 equals negative 19 plus x. Now again, I drew a bad line, but let's draw a line down the equal sign. Now the first thing we should do is do our do and undo box, or our done and undo box. Ask yourself, what's being done to x? Well, negative, it's being added negative 19. Now this is a little bit tricky because we're adding a negative 19, but remember that adding a negative is the same as subtracting. So I'm going to write negative 19 here. Now I'm going to think about my inverse operations. We know that to undo addition, we're going to use subtraction. To undo multiplication and division, we're going to use multiplication or division. So how do I undo a negative 19, or how do I get negative 19 to become 0? Negative is like a subtraction, add 19. So I'm going to add 19 to this side. Now remember, we also need to add it to this side. So now I'm going to simplify. 0 plus 19 is 19. Anything plus 0 is itself. Negative 19 plus 19 is 0. Now I know that, so I'm not even going to write 0. I'm just going to cancel that out. I still have that positive x. I'm going to bring down x. I have x equals 19. Now, I should always check that to make sure it's right. So I'm going to write a check right here. And I copied out my original problem. 0 equals negative 19 plus x. I copy this down and then substitute in my value I got for x. I got that x was positive 19. So negative 19 plus 19. And let's check it in our calculators. Negative 19 plus 19 is 0. My check works, so my answer is x equals 19. Let's do a few more examples. We're dealing with an equation, so let's create our an undo box. Our done and undo box. I'm going to ask myself, okay, what's happening to p? Now this one's a little bit tricky because we see this fraction bar, but remember that this fraction bar means division. So what's being done to p? It's being divided by 10. And I'm going to remember what happens to inverse operations. What do I use? I use addition and subtraction to undo each other, and I use multiplication and division to undo each other. So how do I undo divide by 10? I multiply by 10. Now this is a little bit tricky. You're actually going to multiply by something called the reciprocal, and that's where you're actually multiplying by 10 over 1, and these cancel. You take the numerator and you put it over 1. These cancel. Anything we do to one side, we also need to do to the other. So I'm going to multiply this side by 10. These 10s cancel because 10 over 1 will cancel with 1 over 10. It gives you 1. I'm going to bring down my p equals 20 times 10 is 200. Now let's check our work. I'm going to recopy down the problem just as I saw it. P over 10 equals 20. I found out that P was 200, so where I see a P, I'm going to put 200 over 10 equals 20. Now let's check. 200 divided by 10 gives me 20. I have 20 equals 20. My check works, so my answer is P equals 200. Alright, let's do another example. I'm going to create my box to help me organize my work. Put my line down my equal sign. I'm going to ask myself, what's happening to x? Now when a number, this is called a coefficient. When this coefficient touches a variable like this, what's happening between these two numbers is multiplication. So this is actually saying negative 5 times something, our x is something, equals 90. So what's happening to x is that it's being multiplied by negative 5. Multiplied by negative 5. If it's easier for you and you don't get as confused, you can also write your multiplication sign as a dot times negative 5. So remember, to undo addition and subtraction, we use addition or subtraction. To undo multiplication and division, we use the opposite sign. So how do you undo times negative 5? You divide by, and this is the key part, negative 5. You're going to bring this negative with. Divide by negative 5. So I'm going to divide by negative 5. Now you can write this two ways. Some people like to write it like this, divide by negative 5. And that's okay. I prefer to use a division bar or a fraction bar because I know that that division means, that a fraction bar means divide. So I'm going to write this as divide by negative 5, divide by negative 5. These negative 5s cancel out because negative 5 divided by negative 5 is 1. And a 1x is the same as just having an x. That 1 is invisible. So I have x equals 90 divided by negative 5 is negative 18. Now at this point my x is alone, so I should move on to a check. I'm going to rewrite the problem as I see it. 90 equals negative 5x. 90 equals negative 5. Now, remember that when the negative 5 and the x touch, it means multiply. We can't just write in negative 18 for x, because now that looks like negative 5 minus 18 equals 90. What we need to do is put parentheses around this negative 18, because when the negative 5 touches a parenthesis like this, it also means multiply. So this is telling us to multiply these two numbers just like this setup here. So let's check. Negative 5 times negative 18 is a positive 90. I have 90 equals 90. My check works. So my answer is x equals negative 18. Let's do one more example. So I have negative 1/4 equals p over 8. Now, the first thing that we should ask ourselves is what is being done to p? Well, p is being divided by 8. Divided by 8. Remember how we undo multiplication or division? Well, the undo division, we're going to use multiplication. So I'm going to times by 8. I'm going to times this side by 8. It's really 8 over 1, but you can write 8 if you'd like. Times by 8 over 1, times by 8 over 1. Now this is a little bit tricky, but remember 8 over 1 is the same as 8. You're just multiplying both sides by 8. So you can, if you would like, you can just write times by 8 on both sides. That's fine too. Oops. Now on this side, these 8's cancel. I'm going to bring down my p. 8 times negative 1/4 is a negative 2. So let's check to see if that works. I have negative 1/4 equals p over 8. I'm going to bring down my negative 1/4. I just got that p was negative 8, so negative 2 divided by 8. And when I divide those, I get negative 1/4 equals negative 2 divided by 8. That's negative 1/4. So my check worked. Now when you're dealing with this, you might get that negative 2 divided by 8 equals negative 0.25. But remember that this is just a decimal. Change that decimal into a fraction if you don't know what this fraction is as a decimal. And you'll see that it's negative 0.25. I want to show you one other way we could have done this problem. So I'm going to rewrite it over here. You can use either way. Either way is fine. We've talked previously about how you can pull a fraction out of this. So if I have negative 1/4 equals, remember that in front of this p is a 1. So what I could do is pull a 1/8 out of this, a 1/8, and put my p next to 1/8. P over 8 is the same as 1/8 P. Now if you were to do figure out what's happening to x, you would see that between 1/8 and P, when they touch like this, that means multiply. This is being multiplied by 1/8. How do I undo multiply by 1/8? I divide by 1/8. So let's just see if we get the same answer. If I divide by 1/8 on both sides, do I get the same answer? 1/4 divided by 1/8 is -2. These cancel out, and I'm left with P. So either way works. We're going to talk in a little later about why this works. It's because dividing is the same as multiplying by the reciprocal, and we'll talk about that later. But just know that you can do either method. You can either choose to undo divide by 8, or you can pull out 1/8 as a fraction and then get rid of this 1/8 times P by dividing by 1/8. Either way, you get an answer that P is -2. I want to show you one example where we might make a mistake, and when we check it, we should figure out that we've made a mistake. So I want us to pretend for a minute that we have the problem 10 equals -2x. So I'm going to draw my line down my equal sign. This is example number 6 in your notes. So I'm going to set up my chart, and I'm going to say, okay, what's happening to x? Well, x is being multiplied by a -2. So I'm going to say multiply by -2. Remember, we keep our sign in front. How do I undo multiply by -2? Well, I know that multiplication and division are used to undo each other, so I'm going to divide by -2. Go ahead and do that now. I'm going to divide by 2, divide by 2. Now I'm going to figure out if I got this right. These cancels out. I'm going to bring down my x. 10 divided by 2 is a +5. Now remember, we should always check our answer. So I'm going to go ahead and set up a check. 10 equals -2x. 10 equals -2, and I got 5 for x. Now remember, use parentheses to put your 5 in so that you remember you're multiplying these two. Let's see if it works. -2 times 5 is a -10. I got 10 equals -10. These are not the same. We cannot make a check here. These are not the same. So what we need to do is go back to our work and check. So let's ask ourselves again, okay, what was happening to 10? It was what was happening to x? It was being multiplied by -2. So I said multiply by -2. That's right. How do I undo multiply by -2? I divide by -2. Okay, that's correct. So I came over here and I divided by 2. I forgot to include this negative, and you need to bring that negative with. This is a common mistake that a lot of us will make because we'll forget to bring the negative. I should have divided by -2. So I should have divided 10 by a -2. These cancel now. They look the exact same. I'm going to bring down my x. 10 divided by -2 is a -5. So let's check this again and see if this time it works. 10 equals -2 times -5, which is what I got for x. -2 times a -5 is a +10. My check worked. So this is the correct answer. X equals -5. It's really important that you always do the check because this check was wrong, and if we hadn't checked it, we would have made that silly mistake. So at this point, go ahead and copy down these practice problems, pause the video, do the practice, and then when you're ready, press resume, and you will see the answers. Alright, for this first one, you should have gotten that P equals -12. Remember to undo this -12, we should have added 12 to both sides. On this next one, you should have gotten that n was positive 5. Remember, to undo plus 20, we should have minus 20 on both sides. Practice 3, you should have gotten that n was negative 3. Remember that in between 18 and n is multiplication, so to undo multiplication, we should have divided by 18. In this next one, you should have gotten that n was negative 266. Remember, to undo divide by 14, we're going to multiply both sides by 14. And on this last one, we should have gotten that p was positive 56. Just to practice the other method, let's really quickly, you could have pulled a 1/4 out of here. So that would look like, I drew 3 equal signs, sorry, 1/4 p. Between 1/4 and p is multiplication, so we could have divided both sides by 1/4. And we would have gotten that p was 56. You also could have multiplied both sides by 4 and gotten that p was also 56.